discussions in society in Latvia that is very, I don't know, divided. It seems so. So, what would be your philosophical take on things? How can we improve it? You know, in Plato's city, the Plato thought, that the philosophers should be put in charge of the city, of the state, because they are the best to deal with and to kind of have an insight what's the best for people. So how do you feel that the state as a philosopher?
Well, too many questions, I would say. But first of all, I wouldn't trust philosophers too much. I mean, they are good at some things like analyzing arguments and so on. I'm not so sure whether they are so good in governing. There are good and bad examples. So I'm not sure whether I would be able to answer. So what should we do? Well, probably during our discussion we can come to some conclusion. But one thing that you mentioned, I think it's important that on the one hand, yes, it's important for us to discuss these questions now, because, I mean, we can't wait for the end of this process and then start to talk. Of course, we have to articulate our feelings, our experiences, our discussions and arguments and so on. But on the other hand, I'm sure that in a way this discussion is too early, because we don't have this distance that allow us to understand what is really happening. Because my personal feeling is that yes, we are in the middle of very important and complicated process that we can't really understand, and things are changing. Probably there will be some consequences for students, for teachers, for university, for medicine, for democracy, for the dialogue. But at the moment, it's very, very hard to understand what exactly is happening. So you said that the society is divided. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether it's divided. I agree that, well, on the one hand, I haven't heard of a similar initiative like you had in Latvia. On the other hand, especially when the pandemic started, there were quite a few attempts in the internet to talk about things, read things. I mean, some cultural events. And the idea was we should not give up. We should try somehow to not maybe to live a normal life, but we can't just sit in our rooms and I don't know to do what, ignore everything else. But so there were these initiatives, but I agree that to a certain extent this well, there are a couple of things that is important for democracy that is happening during the COVID crisis, but one of them probably was the question about solidarity, maybe. Yes, so I mean, in the case of crisis, we need to have the solidarity among people, and understanding each other, dialogue, and so on helps to build this solidarity. I think that in case of Latvia, maybe that was missed a bit. Yes, we of course we sort of understood we have a problem. We have now to do something, but we mostly relied, I would say, to experts, to government. Let's wait what they will tell us to do, and there are and probably will be some consequences of this lack of attempt to build certain community, not just fight the fires, but think about society as a community where people talk. I mean, empathize with others, just have the, I mean, one of the key words I would say is this feeling of solidarity. Is that I think that in Latvia didn't really happen. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, but I just wanted to highlight some initiatives that did happen. Apart from the poetry readings and literature readings and translations that people did on Zoom, also it was all organized by NGOs or by internet magazine Satori or some other things. But I have friends who were opening just Facebook Live to read anecdotes, like, or tell anecdotes, because they have that gift. And people were like, there's about 100 people who really wanted something, that relief for 40 minutes, to open beer and listen to that. But there was very important initiative that was started by Ines Vaivara. It's about it's called Viegli palīdzēt, easy to help. It's exactly those people who didn't have help. They didn't have someone to bring them produce. In a countryside, you can't just write to Ribi or whoever, and they will deliver the food to your doorstep. You can't have other companies that deliver you ready-made food. And the people had problems with paying bills, dealing with banks, and things that they really needed some human touch to help each other. So there was a movement, and there is still probably, that really tried to help. It's not so much maybe about the solidarity as a talking about it or this conversation, but they helped each other by doing. And we in Riga, I don't know how it is in Finland, like if Helsinki feels like this big head to somebody that is kind of far away, sometimes Latvia, we have that problem that Riga is kind of taking over, and we don't think what is happening in other places in Latvia, although we are the same country. So, yeah.
I remember this discussion, and yes, especially at the beginning of COVID crisis, people were saying, "Oh well, look how this COVID crisis brings up this feeling of mutual help and solidarity in us, and that would be like an example." But I'm actually dubious about that. I doubt that. I mean, of course, that would be a horrible society where old people would simply won't be able to survive in a situation like that. I mean, thank God that we are not such a society. I mean, but I would say that in a way it's normal. But I think it's still what happened was this isolation, and I don't really think that COVID crisis somehow developed our feeling of solidarity. Look at the children, look at the students. I mean, I have heard several of them saying that, well, I mean, I'm fine being at home watching what's on the screen and so on. And of course, I don't know how it will end, but there is certain danger in that. I'm fine not meeting friends. Yeah, it's fine for me. Yeah.
I could comment on something because I agree with a lot what has been said here, and I think in Finland also we saw this kind of a peak of solidarity in the spring 2020, but by June I think it was more or less gone, and I think again that this is probably how we are as human beings in general. We can maintain the solidarity for a while, but then when you need to do it on a daily basis, you get tired, and then you start to focus on your own things. Unless something keeps it going, something happens, something is done actively to keep it going. And one of the things that we tried to do with the lockdown dialogues was that when we initiated them, we say that, okay, this is a thing that we try to keep going on. We try to have these dialogues as long as necessary. And in the spring 2020, we had them every second week. We had this kind of a national day of dialogue, and then everybody who wanted to arrange their own dialogue, they could do it. And then we would kind of gather all the information that they wanted to give us from those discussions. But I also think...
Sorry, just how does it work? Like someone wants to initiate this, so you helped or someone organizes. It's a Zoom group. How many people get there? Like follow it? Like how does it work? Like logistics of it.
Okay, maybe I explain the background bit because the thing that we did that my company and Time Out Foundation, which is this foundation dedicated to promoting dialogue in Finland, we initiated lockdown dialogues with cooperation with the Finnish government. So we contacted some people from the government that we had been working on the topics of dialogue, and we suggested that, okay, now is this crisis moment, what do you think? Would the government be interested in cooperating to help us to help different organizations and different individuals to arrange these dialogues? And then they agreed. They thought it was a good idea. And the main role that we suggested actually for them is that when we get this information, what people are talking in these dialogues, they could publish it and hopefully also use it as part of their work in the government in order to understand what's going on with the people in general. And after this decision was made, we contacted lots of different organizations and also lots of different individual people who we knew were willing and interested in arranging these dialogues. And then we opened up the web pages for the lockdown dialogues, and anybody, any individual, any organization could participate. Just say that, okay, we will be part of this, we will also have the dialogue, and they could be like workplaces, different kind of NGO volunteers, or just individual people who invited their friends to be part of this bigger dialogue day every second week in the spring of 2020. And then they would bring us notes from those dialogues, they would send them to us, and then with some people from the government, we went through all those different notes, and then we wrote these national summaries.
But what is the theme? Was it always something that connected to pandemic, or there could be, some random, how teens are dealing with the fact that the stores are closed and they're not getting new jeans or something? How small and minute could be some, subject?
Yes, well, this is crucial also. We wanted people to feel that they could decide what was relevant for them. We gave them, in the spring 2020, we only gave them 2 questions. We suggested 2 questions that we said that at least these would be relevant for the national summaries. And those questions were that, what are the things that you're worried at the moment? And what are the things that make you feel hopeful or confident at the moment? Because we thought that this would be kind of a relevant information for different people in general, different organizations, but also for the government. So people were really free to choose whatever level or what different topics they were talking about in those dialogues. And we just asked them to provide some information of the things that came up in the dialogues. But most people who arrange and most organizations who arrange those dialogues use those 2 questions. So during 2020, most of our summaries were just about trying to explicate and describe what people were worried about at the moment and what were the things that made them hopeful or confident. But again, I mean, we had so many different groups of people talking. We had like immigrant mothers, we had museum staff, for example. We had people from schools or even individual companies arrange their own kind of a lockdown dialogue. So we got lots of different perspectives from the different sides of the society. But I want to say something that came to my mind also was that I think the difference between these kind of cultural events, which were super important and super necessary during the first wave of the pandemic. I think the difference was that in these dialogues, everybody was participating. You were not just kind of being entertained or relieved by somebody else doing something. You were there to tell other people what is your experience at the moment. And from the information that we got from those dialogues, it seemed that most of the people felt that this kind of a two-way sharing or five-way sharing, depending on how big the groups were, was very, very important for the people. And I think that is something probably that kind of helped to maintain some kind of, so not necessarily solidarity, but at least some sort of empathy and understanding that we experienced the pandemic and the lockdown measures and everything very differently in very individual ways. And maybe it kind of strengthened or built some kind of a tolerance also toward these differences and towards these difficult decisions that were needed constantly be made in all levels of the society and also in everyday lives of individuals.
Of course, my aim is not to replace the topic of today's discussion with solidarity, but when I talk about solidarity is, well, look, why you should wear your mask in a tram? Yes, so I mean, why you should care about somebody, whether somebody will catch the virus? And I mean, that's kind of solidarity I'm talking, not so much about helping people who can't survive. And in order to do that, I would say it's one of the ways how to attempt at least to create something like that is to involve people. Now, I'm not sure whether dialogues like you organize can achieve this, because my guess is that it was still quite narrow groups that participated. But I think that's, I mean, this is a attempt that is important and that makes sense, because if you have an approach when there are, let's say, experts like us discussing things, doctors discussing on TV and telling you what to do, and then these experts are invited to the cabinet of ministers, and the prime minister at the end of the day announces what kind of prohibitions are introduced. I mean, it's just an order. It's just somebody tells you to do things, and so why you should follow when you can escape it? I mean, but when you participate in this decision making, when you have talked with others, well, yes, maybe that's what we should do. Maybe we should put on masks. I mean, it makes sense because you maybe won't get ill. Then it's a completely different kind of attitude, and I mean that's the difference. That's the difference whether you achieve. For example, this prohibition by talking, discussing, being involved in this decision, or you listen what an expert tells you to do, and then you notice that many people would simply ignore it, maybe just because some experts told them to do. Yeah.
If I comment very quickly, I think this is exactly something that we hope that these dialogues could provide. And of course, it's true, it was such a small group that participated if you compared it to the whole population of Finland. But I think in principle, what we were trying to do, we were trying to give this more general message that, okay, come on, people, this is a crisis situation. Sit down, join others, talk, share experiences, and also because in this kind of dialogue that we are practicing in Dialogue Academy and in Finland in more wider sense now, you don't need to make decisions in those situations. The only aim of dialogue is kind of get a better understanding. Get a better understanding of the topic that we are talking about from other people and also of yourself. And I think that was something that I really emphasized with many people that I was training to organize those dialogues, was that emphasize these dimensions of understanding yourself, because we are now in a crisis situation, and I think most of us, when we start to think about it, we realize that we also act in strange ways. So let's just try to give the signal to as many people as possible that this is also the time to sit down, come together, and try to understand what is going on. And of course, as you said in the beginning, that it is very there's so many uncertainties in this situation, so we can't understand that much, but at least we can come together and try to understand what's going on in us in this uncertain situation. And I think that can bring lots of good things. And I also think that this is something not just that ordinary citizens should do. I think this is exactly what also the government should do and the experts should do at the same time when they are also needed to make those difficult decisions. I think they should also take the time and try to have these dialogues, and just for a while, in order to understand better what's happening and how they are reacting to it.
I think it's obvious it's not going to happen here in Latvia, meanwhile, because it's not only second-year discussions how we should deal with, immediate emergency of pandemic, but also since we are just in the middle of the crisis, and there's people just in Latvia last week, we were waiting for what are going to be decisions. It was clear some decisions are going to be made. And then the experts were vaguely involved, meaning they were involved and they were not, their opinions were not considered, actually. So that gives this feeling that you, as a average, some kind of citizen, you're okay, what are the chances? Or you have to hit the streets, that also people do that here, they are against all these government measures. But there's another thing that the virus and pandemic, it opens all these societal wounds, and it opens it for everyone to see. And it's and suddenly, since the discussions in social networks very open, you can see under every, the government press conference that most of the comments are absolutely, they're very, lots of angry people trying, to overdo each other, who will pick, who will explain it better. But it's been there all before. So what are your suggestions? Your suggestions, dialogue. So artists, do you think in Latvia what kind of dialogue would be possible? Okay, Kai says with government, like through the government, all these dialogue kind of, sharing, So what would your take?
Well, well, first of all, of course. Of course, it would be silly to imagine that it just takes somebody to announce, let's say, let's have a discussion, and suddenly there will be discussion of free minds and no conflicts and just rational agreements. You have to develop certain dispositions, and I know that's something that COVID really showed. I think that we knew that before, that we in our democracy we don't have these dispositions to seriously involve people. We can encounter it regularly when there are some projects and the general public discussions are required, but quite often they are so formal, yes, and nobody really takes it seriously, and I think that's, I mean, I don't see why Latvians wouldn't be able to do the same as others. Yeah, I mean, it just you have to at least try to change this mood and way of thinking. But of course, I agree that that when COVID starts, then it's maybe too late. And that's and I agree completely that COVID showed lots. I mean, brought up lots of problems that, in a way, are fascinating. I would say. I mean, who knew that there are so many people who don't really believe in science, in medicine, and I mean, that was a surprise. For me, it was a surprise. And for some reason, I remember that, and then you went in other direction. But I remember again this beginning of the COVID crisis when Eastern Europe didn't really suffer a lot. So Western Europeans, Italians were falling ill, and Baltic states and Eastern Europe was doing sort of all right. And then there were different kind of versions. So why it's so, and I remember Latvian politicians even claimed that maybe there is some Latvian gene that helps you to survive COVID.
Or Soviet vaccines that we've got them in Soviet times, so now nothing can take us.
Yeah. So I mean, it turned out that it's not quite so. Yeah, but they were funny. But one version that I heard seemed to me interesting, that that Eastern Europe was and Europeans were so. I mean, they knew that their medical system, know how to say it. Healthcare system is so weak and so fragile that everybody should look after oneself, and so they just I don't know, isolated themselves, took this prohibition seriously, which does not really show anything good about Latvia. It just shows that we don't trust our healthcare system. And one of the bad things, and really I'm disappointing in that this it's possible. Well, this crisis provided a possibility to seriously think about many aspects of our society, including trust, including solidarity, including what is happening with science, including what is happening in healthcare system. But I would say that especially government is so focused on the on solving the crisis in very short distance now, but yeah. So and I'm really afraid that these wounds that the COVID made obvious and visible, they won't be healed. Yes, that we will just try to, I don't know, hush it up and hide them and so on, and we will return to some worse situations than it was before. Yeah. So I think that the COVID crisis is really a very important event. But yeah. So what should we do without starting a dialogue? I have this thing. I mean, philosopher. That's not a philosophical question, certainly. But I'll think a bit.
Oh, perfect. Two philosophers, and that is not a philosophical question. Wonderful. But Kai, there's this modern mantra of personal responsibility, of meritocracy, that those who are the best will, persevere, and those should be listened to. So do you see it also in Finland? Because it has been very much the case in Latvia that this approach somehow punishes the most disadvantaged, the uneducated people, or people who are kind of on the margins of society. And so it's this personal responsibility. And you know how democracy works. Everyone should take responsibility. And just to explain the situation also in Latvia, what happened in pandemic, of course, suddenly all the schools are moving, and also universities, to this distance learning. And there are no parents sometimes who can run these computers. There are no computers. Minister of Education is kind of suspicious why these families want so many computers, because because it turns out every kid needs one, because the lessons are not the same lessons. So there was this big gap, social gap. The people who can pay for that, people can afford it, and people who are kind of lost in that. So did you see that happening also in Finland? And was it a part of this dialogue you were trying to solve?
Yes, definitely we could see it happen in Finland also. And I think, especially in spring 2020, I keep coming back to the beginning of the COVID crisis. I think, at least for me, and I suppose for many people, you felt that this is kind of an X-ray to our whole society, that suddenly everything is so clear. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? Who has the power? All these sort of things were very, very clear for a moment. And I think one part of our dialogues was to try to reach out, and I really have to thank for the people who were participating, who are participating in the lockdown dialogues from the Finnish government. They were really, really eager to try to reach those people who were somehow marginalized, who were somehow in vulnerable situation. They didn't really have the contacts, but we luckily knew and had worked with many NGOs, for example. So we were able to reach lots of these kind of people and help those organizations to arrange those dialogues, so we could get some perspective to their experiences. And then when we were writing those summaries, we could say something at least in public that, okay, these people, these immigrant mothers, or these people who are unemployed, or who are struggling with these different situations, this was how they felt. Of course, we couldn't say that much about it, but at least we could acknowledge those things. And I have to say, one particular example which was interesting was that one of the organizers of these dialogues was the Kulttuuras Foundation, which is the foundation for Russian-speaking people in Finland. And the feedback that we got from the first summary was very moving for me, because they said the title was something that Finnish people came together to talk about the COVID situation. And they said that some people who have participated in their dialogue were very moved that they were included under this title, Finnish people came together. And for me, it was so obvious that, of course, they were like that, but I had no idea that they felt that this was somehow unusual, that now the government publishes this summary where their dialogue is included among other Finnish groups. And again, of course, we are talking about very, very small thing, but I think in principle, these examples, I hope that they could have some sort of influence, or at least show an example how we could reach out to those people's experiences and acknowledge them, because it has to start from there. And I don't think that in democracies we can expect that people are very responsible if they don't feel that they are recognized and acknowledged first from the kind of from the side of the society in general. And yeah, so I think and I still think the divisions are there. We also have the crisis have done huge damages for children especially and young people, and I suppose for many other groups of people. So there's lots of repairing need to be done. But I still think that even in order to do that, we somehow need to first come together and hear how people have experienced it. And I want to say something, because also some other thing, because the whole topic of internet and social media comes up quite a lot. And my understanding is that the difference between what people write online and in social media and what they actually express when they come together with other people, there is a huge difference. So we are now in this paradoxical situation where we kind of think that we know how other people feel about it because we can read it online.
Or
But
we
actually,
talk to cab drivers.
yeah,
We talk to people.
yeah. But then we just see one aspect of it, and it's very different when you enter with that person in a dialogue, and you realize that okay, it's much more complicated. And usually people are not so strict with their opinions and their stances when you really start and engage in a dialogue with them. So I think there is this kind of a paradox where we constantly think that we know what other people here think about, but then in reality, we really don't.
I think what helps, if you're in public transportation, you overhear conversations that are sometimes exactly the same as in social media and sometimes not. Another phenomena, if you want to know what the people in the country think, you have to talk to cab drivers that work for me in Israel. You always know what's happening. So also here in Riga, once you get in a cab, it's very often you are just like, it's like a radio, that gets you how the vaccines are all wrong and who needs masks. You can take it off. And why do you need it? And look, I'm like for 3 years driving and nothing, 1,000 people have passed my cab. So you do hear that that's not just some imaginary social media world. That's the people that's their take. And of course, the opinions are very different, or sometimes they say, no, you're safe, I'm vaccinated. You don't need to wear masks. But at least there's all kinds of, yeah, you're right. You can talk to and you can communicate. It's less, let's say, kind of violent or aggressive, obviously. I'm not sure about the social aspect of this. People on the margins, people who are not on equal standing financially. So, Artis, what do you think in society of Latvia? Are there ways to overcome it apart from let's just throw tons of money that we probably don't have at the people to solve it? So, what would be a solution? How to even it out, because probably, okay, now we are still, there's no distance learning, but it could be very soon that it's going to happen again.
A bit returning to what we talked a couple of minutes ago, I agree that COVID crisis created almost like an X-ray of our society, and you are asking, so what should we do? And there are two-level kind of answers to that. One is what we can do immediately, and in a way that's government's answer. And of course, I didn't want to sound haughty, or how to say it properly. In a way, I wouldn't want to be in place of them and deal with all these problems. These are difficult problems. But what this X-ray showed, I would say, is that there are fundamental systemic problems. Yeah, so that's what we noticed. And of course, in a way, we understand. So now it's crisis. How can you now solve systemic problems? But the problem is that you can avoid all this only by addressing these fundamental questions. And so, question about margins of society, whatever it means. Yes, I mean, again, there is one thing that you can say. Well, we should, I don't know, invite them and I don't know, to have a soup together or whatever. But then another thing is all these structural questions, including attitude towards democracy, including attitude or understanding what is government. Is it some instance that gives orders and is based on experts' decisions, or government is part of this community which talks with everybody and I completely agree, acknowledges people. I mean, and that's also quite often people don't understand, and they don't understand in government. They don't understand it. I mean, I think Michael Walzer, when he wrote about justice, he said, well, I don't remember now exactly, but his example was, so why people are quite often not happy or angry about social, how to say, help. So when government gives you some money, I don't know how to.
Social assistance or support. Or
yeah, social support. Like, yeah. Yes. So government gives them money, and they come and they are not thankful. I mean, and part of it is that this way of dealing with people is in a way dehumanizing, and it's not really acknowledging their worth. Yes, so exactly this kind of understanding how to deal with a problem is just let's throw some money, but we won't throw to everybody. We want them to prove that they are poor. Yes, so when you will come and prove that you are poor, then I'll give you money, and you have to be thankful. I mean that's and then we are surprised why people are not happy about that. Yes, and so and now how to change it? Well, it's not just about making bureaucrats smile more, but it's. I mean, yeah, it's. Of course, I'm not. I mean, in a way, I believe in everything. I believe in culture. I believe in institutions. I believe in Marxism. All of it. Yeah. So, and of course, I'm not naive. I'm not saying that you just have to make a seminar for I don't know, some.
Teachers' assistants
and ministers, and then they will change their behavior and so on. But I think there's nothing else that's left to us but trying, talking. I mean, even if you can't hope that your dialogues will change Finland, I mean, what else is left? You just keep trying. Yes, you keep, and the same about yes, this changing of attitude. I mean, of course you can't change immediately attitude, and if you are asking what to do, I mean, you have to try. You have to try to change this attitude, and this attitude is important. It's so it's not just about technical solutions. Yes, it's a question that you raised about democracy. What's democracy? What kind of society we want to live? How do we imagine ourselves? So who are we? Who as citizens and so on? But it's complicated. I agree.
Kai, I just want to explain you, but Artis mentioned this, that you have to prove that you are poor, or you have to prove that you need that money. In the very, it was, I think it was last year or this year, when there was all these discussions that the parents need some financial support because they need either laptops or the help, or they are losing work. So there was this discussion to have a child support just for one time, 500 euros. And there was this whole area of discussions. So, but maybe you have too much money. So, how are we going to throw that money for the people who already have it? And maybe, so how we will sort the families with children that only those who need it will get those 500 euros. Or, oh my God, they'll be all rich now suddenly. And so, finally, what was made, the decision was made, everyone got it. Like if you have a child and you're raising him or her, then yes, you get that support, and there's no discussions. And also about the seniors who the pension, they have pension. There was about 200 or some kind of euros, right? Added, like given. Added just the support for these kind of difficult times in pandemic. How many discussions we have said that some people who have higher pensions than the average, oh my God, they'll get some extra 200 euros. And it's never this understanding that maybe they will help their neighbors, maybe will help, I don't know, their grandchildren. It was this like society watching each other so that someone doesn't get too much. So talking about the things that you had few of those dialogues and you organized dialogues, what you learned there? Okay, so what were the fears? What was those positive moments that helped to survive? And so what's the essence of those dialogues? Maybe we can learn.
Well, I have to say that I think that this is the big problem of all social work in general, also in Finland, that we have managed to create a system where people constantly need to prove how bad they're doing. But that's just a side comment. But I recognize the problem. What did I learn from the dialogues in general? Well, I think it was very surprising first how people actually did have quite a lot of trust in their life. When we asked them that what are the things that you are hopeful and trustful, they and the very interesting thing in the spring 2020 was that no matter what kind of group of people were having the dialogue, they always felt that they were really privileged, even though they would be we had a group of people who were on a leave from prison, and they were like, oh, we are so privileged. We are so privileged, because they always saw somebody else in the society who was not so privileged. That was very moving for me, and I think that was the great moment of solidarity that didn't maybe last so long. And I think mostly people were afraid for their loved ones.
For their lives?
Not their own lives, for their loved ones, the people near them. How are they safe? Are their children safe? Are their parents safe? Are their colleagues safe? So I think that was the greatest fear. Of course, then there were these kind of a distant fears about will I lose my job and those sort of things. But I think the most important thing was mostly that those people around me, are they safe? But what also gave lots of hope for people was also the event of dialogue, that there is this possibility that when we do come together and when we share our experiences and try to understand each other, it immediately brings us hope. Because I think if we are in any level successful in that, if you feel that somebody has been listening to me, I think it kind of for most people, it kind of brings up this hope for the whole humanity in general. And I think, again, I have to say something nice about the government, or at least some people there, because I have been so lucky to be able to work with some very wonderful people from the Finnish government. And I think when we initiated the lockdown dialogues, they were very specific, that they said that, okay, in the government, we usually go and meet the citizens in order to tell them something, to teach them something, to kind of inform them about something. But this is the thing. This is in these dialogues. Even though we gather the information and write the summaries, uh, and they also say that this is something how they would like to develop the government also in the future, is that we should have much more places where the government only listens. When they come and meet people, they just come there to listen, and not only just listen, because I think even in that situation you kind of put yourself apart from other citizens, but more like listen and then share and think about things together. And I think that is something that in I think all democracies, even the well-functioning democracies in Europe that I know, I don't think we have enough of this kind of attitude in governments where people would just think that, okay, our job, big part of our job is just to listen what people have to say. And I think if we would do that more, I think at least that would bring hope to me. And I have to say something about also this kind of a timeline thinking, that is it too late or is it too early? We wouldn't be able to do the lockdown dialogues if there wouldn't have not been this kind of a dialogical work and dialogue movement for Finland for over 20 years. So I think in this crisis situation, we were kind of able to capitalize, if you can say that, of this long work that so many people have done in different parts of the society to practice dialogue and try to kind of make it part of democracy, make it part of public services, make it part of schools and kindergartens, make it even part of the government. And when the crisis moment came, we could invite, like we had over 100 different organizations who were ready to join. And they actually, most of them, they knew what was required. They knew what could be done. How can you arrange a dialogue in a crisis situation? So I think, you have to start some point. you have to start build it bit by bit. And of course, knowing from Latvia, I know that you have this wonderful Lampa festival, for example, that has been doing this kind of a groundwork for discussion, democratic discussion in this society.
I remember, since you come back always to the spring of 2020, there was this suddenly lockdown was happening everywhere, obviously. And I remember there was this famous video from Israel. In Israel, most of the people have lots of children in the family. And there's this wonderful young mother, and she was just in her car sitting, not driving anywhere because you couldn't drive anywhere. So she was sitting in the car, turned her phone on, and she was screaming. And her message was this: I have 4 children. I've been doing the homework with 4 of them. Each one of them has to either sing a song or draw or write or something. How do you feel today? How do you feel in this lockdown today? And she's like screaming, who is going to ask me how I'm doing? They are doing fine. I fed them. We were playing, meaning she said, I'm going nuts. And not because I don't love my children, because I'm just going crawling, on the wall. But nobody's asking me. It's like, ask me to draw a picture how I'm feeling. And she's like, I can't draw anything. And it was very, people shared it because, of course, they relate to that so much. And I have to say that in Riga, we were allowed to meet, but they're keeping distance. And, of course, I saw people sitting in cemetery on a different kind of benches and screaming over each other, and just talking outside. And also New Year's, celebrating New Year's with a distance. You leave something and someone comes. People were pretty much observing the rules because we didn't have vaccines yet. You just have to remember that we came to it a bit later. And so this communication was very important. So no, Zoom can't obviously can't replace it, Yeah, Lampa is good because you do have to ask the questions or fight or talk on the stage, sure. But when you think about, do you feel like in your dialogue projects you had enough people involved who are those people who are either left behind, or people who feel that nobody's listening to them, or people who are just tired because they are so busy earning some kind of sustenance and some food for the family that it's miles out of their everyday life thinking into participating in some kind of I was thinking that it's only social workers that come with a page and say, okay, tell me, how do you feel, are you managing, how's like, I can imagine that they can talk to people like that, but it would be very hard to get their opinions out in for the government or someone to hear.
Yeah, I mean, we have had people who in difficult life situations in those dialogues, but of course, it's not enough. I mean, and I think this is something that should be systematically thought of in democratic societies, that what can we do because we need to they don't come to these events that we arrange.
No.
And we also were thinking in the beginning that because not everybody have computer or smartphones, so we actually did have some dialogues as group phone calls. So especially for elderly people, that they could participate. So we were just trying to find out these instruments, how we could bring in more people. But I don't think we were able to get some representation of people who are in difficult life situations. But of course, it's not enough. And I think this is definitely something that we, as democratic societies, we should work hard in order to find ways how we can reach out to those people. What are the venues, what are the forums that they could come, or where we could go to have these dialogues with them.
Did you involve churches or mosques?
Yes, yeah, we did involve lots of religious communities. We involved lots of NGOs that are working with different kind of marginalized groups. We even had the organization that is working for sex workers. We had several sex workers dialogues, also part of it. And so we managed, because especially my company, we have worked a lot with different NGOs and social workers, and so we kind of have this kind of a second-hand reach out for these kind of groups. So we were able to bring in lots of actors who were able to bring the dialogues to these kind of groups. But then you realize, especially when the crisis went on and on and on, these kind of groups start to drop out from the dialogues quite easily. And I also realized that it would require even more effort now to somehow to reach out for them. And I think this is probably the biggest question that we are facing in Finland, at least, is that we have a quite big part of the population who kind of, at least for now, managed to come out of the crisis. It's not over, but at least in this part, quite well. I mean, for example, in my friends, I don't know many people who were left unemployed, for example. People still manage to have their jobs and those sort of things. But we know, and this also comes from the social workers and schools and everywhere where my colleagues and I'm also working, that there are so many families that are not doing well. And I think we should do something very quickly now, when we have the possibility in Finland, now when the society is more or less open, that how to reach out for them. And of course, I think this is obviously a big responsibility for the government. And I have no idea, do they have a good plan for it or not. But I think this is something that in principle, I think we could do with all the resources and all the networks that we have in our society. But then again, it comes to the willpower. Are we really, really willing to do that? And I don't have the answer, obviously.
We had recently a report at the museum about the situation in Europe, about concerning hate speech, against violence that has risen during the pandemic against all kinds of ethnic groups, religious groups. I somehow thought it's just social media. Turns out it's not the case, if we are talking about the Europe. So of course people are, they're pissed off, they want to get some kind of outlet, and sometimes between the words and comments things get out of hand. So obviously we are not managing that well, you know, with emotions or fears in our society. But if something could be done, I don't know, on the school level. Artis, you're involved in, you work at university, you teach there, you see, you know, how students are reacting, and schools. Do you see also the people are more angrier, or students are well behaved and everything's fine, or so? What do you think? Is there possibility at universities somehow to get those people involved in these types of dialogues? Because universities also bring together people from different regions, different social strata.
I'm not sure whether I'm able to answer that because, well, I don't, in my personal experience, and I don't feel anything like that. And well, I mean, ethnic prejudices and different kind of stereotypes, again, it's not really a new problem for Latvia society, and therefore to distinguish what was before and what's now, it's I would say it's really hard. But by the way, do you really? Are these data that you are referring to? They are about Latvia, because, well, what I'm afraid, I'm not so much afraid of kind of racist maybe attitudes, or but and afraid is maybe not the right word, but my guess is that COVID crisis will foster kind of populist attitudes, which is again very strange kind of relationship between populism and democracy, because many populists really believe in not really believe in democracy, but they want larger or bigger democracy and participation, and they feel that they are left out, and there is this angry attitudes towards elites, and that I would say I think that I notice in Latvia that this this being angry, it's not really hatred, but yes, so being angry about elites, that is growing. That there is difference in kind of ethnic attitudes, I haven't noticed. So so have you noticed, or the data that you are referring to there about Latvia?
It's meaningless what I have noticed, because
Yeah.
I noticed I got very different reactions, because I worked in a museum that's connected to the Jews, like in Holocaust.
Okay.
So obviously I get hit with more intensely, that I would say, oh my God, there were so many anti-Semitic people in Latvia, and that wouldn't be your case
Yeah,
at all.
but would you say that that has changed because
Yes.
of COVID?
I don't know, because of COVID, maybe people have more extra time on their hands, or
Okay,
maybe
so,
maybe they're spending more time on internet. I don't know, but and also there's. It just seems that maybe you will never meet that person ever again on the street, so you can write freely and attack freely, you know. Data from Europe, yes, it's very high. It's a sharp raise and on hate speech and attacks. I'm talking about Europe, but also in Latvia, what we had data from Human Rights Center, and also from we as LGBT community, because they monitor the hate speech and attacks and what is happening. Personal also is if someone writes to them and shows how what kind of personal comments and threats they get, you know, and they are not interested going to police with that unless it's something extreme, but they do monitor it, and then it's much higher than it was last year or year before.
Yeah, the problem is that I'm not in social media. I'm not in Facebook or on Twitter, and so
I know. That's why you have this like wonderful
i-
attitudes towards human beings.
yeah, illusion, some kind of illusions. Yeah,
Illusion. Yeah.
but certainly no, I don't feel it at university or otherwise. No, no.
But the students who start to study, do you see that they're doing financially or socially well? Do you have a higher dropout rate or something like that?
Actually, in philosophy, we do. That was really noticeable. That during last year, and it's not just there was dropout, but I talked with some, and it seems like our students didn't like this Zoom kind of for
Yeah.
Teams, Microsoft Teams teaching environment. But yeah, but again, unfortunately, I won't be able to comment. So what are the real reasons for the dropout and attitudes? Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know.
So it's your mental choices basically not to hit social media and yours too. That unites two philosophers, turns out.
Well, I mean, there's no some proper explanation of that. This is not my kind of faith or anything. It just happens so. And I mean, my time is so saturated that I can't really imagine. I can't imagine myself going through Facebook news every day. So, yeah.
For me, it was a deliberate choice done maybe 2011. I was 3 weeks in Facebook, and I decided that I like my friends better when I don't see what they're posting in social media. So it was a deliberate illusion of dealing with humanity, yeah. So, but it of course, having this distance, I think of course there's lots of things that I don't understand about the world around me. But at the same time, I also realize I constantly come back to these differences between what we show about ourselves online and how we behave when we meet each other or when we are in a more kind of a dialogical relationship. And I think that because internet and social media tends to, at least at the moment, bring out the nastier side of humanity in many occasions, I think the more we need to those encounters where the other side, this more beautiful side, I would say, comes out. Because I think we need the antidote, because otherwise we start to believe that this is what humans are only capable of. And I'm so convinced, because my work is just full of these wonderful kind of dialogues all the time. I think the human beings are still amazingly surprising and beautiful. And even those kind of discussions where I meet people that I completely disagree with, I can still somehow identify and find some level of common humanity with almost everybody.
Do you meet now on? I mean, you before explained online meetings, but do you have now when Finland has, is in much a better place after pandemic? Do you have the real meetings like with
Yeah,
3D people?
both, and both. And what was so surprising, and I'm very happy about this, was that I was so skeptic about these online dialogues, these Zoom, Teams, Google Meet dialogues when we started with them. And I have been I still don't think they are the same. I still, they're kind of a second best option, but I have been so surprised how big the power of dialogue can also be when it's well done in those medias. I think it has provided us a great opportunity to also come together in a different way, not physically in the same space. And during this lockdown dialogues, we also had these European lockdown dialogues. We had people from different countries, and we were sharing experiences, what it's like in Italy and France and UK, Finland, Sweden. There are lots of, and that was also something really powerful, because it felt that, okay, everybody's isolated in their own countries, but then we had this opportunity to come together online and just spend 2 hours just sharing experiences, and that really boosted my faith in humanity at that moment.
That somehow did connect people, because I remember with all the American talk shows, for example, or political issues or everything else that we had. You see them doing their TV shows from their own basically backyard, from their own studio. Without makeup, with really overgrown hair, there was something very touching, because you felt this kind of human experience that none of us yet, we don't know what to do. So your solution is to have these dialogues. Some solution was to meet friends in cemetery with a big distance and shout at each other, because at least that. So, and then you see that the whole world for a while is living like that, So I think that is something that would be this kind of feeling that you belong to the same humanity, or you have solidarity with those people. But somehow we didn't leave that experience. I'm afraid better people.
I think there is at least one aspect that needs to be raised up, is, and this is my internet critical side again, because so much of the way how social media and all these internet platforms work is that we are kind of creating images of ourselves. It's like very much self-branding, and with that kind of attitude, it's not easy to change to the listening mode. It's more like you are constantly saying, this is what is happening to me, this is what I am thinking, this is what I'm eating, this is my opinion about this and that and that. So if and I think this has been a huge change in our kind of a behavioral norms, because I think in general the older norm was that, how are you? This is the first question that you ask about people when you meet them. How are you? And now we are in a mode where we are constantly saying, how am I? So I again come back to the listening aspect, that we have so few places, so few moments anymore where we are just focusing more on listening to other people. And I think this is one of the reasons why people feel that they are left without a voice, and they become angry and they become lonely, even when they're in a crowd or with other people, because if nobody's listening to you, you start to lose your connection to the reality and to other people. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so kind of passionate about creating these spaces and these moments where people just come together to listen to each other, because I don't think we have those spaces. I don't know, have we ever had them in a very big kind of a way anyway, but now it seems it's less and less. We have lots of talk, we have lots of expression, but we have very, very little listening.
Artist, what do you think about in Latvia, I'm thinking now, democratic culture, is it undermined now by what is happening, how government's dealing with the crisis? So as we as society reacting to it, elections are coming, people are getting more passionate and maybe divided, or more populist movements are, kind of, we can follow, what is happening. So do you feel, or it's some kind of illusion, that it is a democratic culture is a bit under threat here if we don't do something?
First, I wanted just to add maybe to what I said previously. Maybe I created a wrong kind of image. Of course, I'm living in a bubble, like I would say anybody, but it's not that I'm not really following what's going on in the world. I mean, for example, I don't read comments to articles in the internet because I have read them and they keep repeating themselves. So in order to notice the difference between what happened, what these comments were 2 years ago and now, I mean, you have to really do statistics almost, like you can't just look at them and understand. And I was rather asking you, why do you think that there are these tendencies? It's not that I haven't heard that, for example, in Europe, this kind of racist attitudes have grown, but I haven't noticed in Latvia, and I haven't read about it. So that was my comment, and so I do follow what's going on in Latvia, more or less, and. But again, whether what is happening with Latvian democracy, I think that Latvian democracy is, in a way, a bit fragile anyway. But again, what do we understand with that? I mean, on the one hand, I think that we are doing quite well. I mean, what do we compare ourselves with? And again, we keep returning to 2020, the spring of 2020, and then I think Agamben was Giorgio Agamben, this Italian philosopher, published a couple of notes, and he was very concerned about what's going on in Europe and what's going on with democracy, that basically we are almost like going towards totalitarian kind of society, because and that was impressive in a way, how easily we accepted all these rules, prohibitions. I mean, government tells us not to go in the street, we don't meet other people, we don't. Yes, and that was a bit kind of scary. But still notice that I would say our democracy, not in every state, I would say, not even in Europe, there were a couple of states where they had serious problems. But let's say in Latvia, we have this institutional kind of principles that if you have state of emergency, you have to announce when it ends. And now we saw how important this institutions is. And so we have democratic institutions in Latvia, and I would say they work in a way. So in that sense, I'm not concerned about democracy in Latvia. In other sense, yes, so what we talked a lot about in a way today. So this relationship between society and elite, relationship between society and government, I see a problem there for democracy, but it's not a new problem, and it's COVID simply made it clear. So whether I'm really concerned about elections or what will happen with Latvian democracy, not really. No, I don't feel that we are in the state of emergency, but we obviously have lots of weaknesses, and unfortunately, it's hard to tell whether we will be able to really acknowledge them and work on them seriously. That I'm not so sure.
It's very interesting to hear what you say, Artis, because I also think that there is a possibility that this crisis can also be a boost for democracy. And I think one of the reasons is that because for the first time, at least in my lifetime, so many democratic countries have needed to face this situation where basic rights needed to be limited. And that has brought out a huge amount of discussion about basic rights and constitutional rights and the basic institutions of democracy and those sort of things, in a situation where we can still have at least the hope that we can kind of go back to kind of a more or less normal democratic procedures in society. And at least in Finland, I know that I have never heard so much talk about the Finnish constitutions that I've heard during the COVID crisis. Even at the gym, people are talking about Finnish constitution. And as a philosopher of democracy, I've been super inspired, because I'm like, oh, everybody, not of course everybody, but so many more people are talking about, I don't know, is it here, but like, is this, what does the Constitution say about the Green Pass, and what does the Constitution say about this? Isn't this unconstitutional?
Yeah.
So I think, I'm like, well, we could never have this kind of a civic lesson about basic rights and constitution and democratic institutions and whatever that we have had now. And of course, we have made different solutions, and I suppose we have broken laws and constitutions when we are doing it. But if we manage to somehow come out from this crisis as somehow democratic societies, I assume that we have learned a lot. But again, I think we won't be able to use that understanding if we don't keep the conversation going after the crisis.
So hopefully next Nordic talks will be in a year or in two, and we will be like talking what we learned, what we understood when now life is back to normal, hopefully, and also about democratic process. There was a discussion. If you're not okay with government decisions, is it okay to overcome the government prohibitions and hit the streets and go and organize protests? And there was found few ways how to do it officially, how you write for 15 or 16 different protests. So that is true that people had this conversation about democracy and what they need and how they have to express themselves. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Kai Alchanen and Artis Svetse, for sharing your take as philosophers here. And thank you so much to Nordic Council of Ministers office in Latvia who supported these talks. Thank you to all the people who watched. And I hope we'll learn something and it will be over when? In 3 months? The government gave us an end date. Yeah. Thank you so much. Good night.